everybody. Welcome back to the Blockware Intelligence Podcast. Hope you're all doing well. Before we get into the show, let me tell you a little bit about our sponsor, FTX US. FTX US, one of the largest crypto companies in the United States, is the safest, most regulated way to buy and sell Bitcoin, Ethereum, and other digital assets. With FTX, you can trade crypto with up to 85% lower fees than top competitors. There are no fixed minimum fees, no ACH transaction fees, and no withdrawal fees. FTX has also recently announced their stocks beta rolling out to US customers to enable crypto, stocks, and NFT trading in one interface. This includes hundreds of US exchange-listed securities, including common stocks and ETFs, and an integrated experience within the existing FTX US cryptocurrency trading application. Use promo code Blockware1 or go to ftx.blockwareintelligence.com to earn free crypto on every trade over $10. Again, that's Blockware1 or go to ftx.blockwareintelligence.com to get started today. Now let's get into the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Blockware Intelligence Podcast. Today we have Max and Stacy, who both need no introduction. Thank you both so much for taking the time to come on the show. Been really looking forward to this one.
Good to meet you, William.
Yeah, it's great, William. Great to see you.
We've been going back and forth a little bit on Twitter, but it's finally nice to chat. So there's no shortage of things to talk about. I kind of want to start first with, before diving into kind of like current events, I want to back way up and talk about your early days in markets before you even got into Bitcoin. And what were those some early experiences in markets that kind of made you realize how corrupt the current fiat system was?
Okay, I guess I'll dive in there. So, I started on Wall Street in 1982, and that was my first job out of college. I was in New York, and the stock market had been through a 16-year bear market, so things were dire. And then suddenly the bull market started, and on Wall Street, it's very, very creative. Particularly in the early 80s, it's extraordinarily easy to do a lot of nefarious things. You can hide trades, you can rebook trades, you can what we call look-back trading, which is kind of parking stock in one account and taking advantage of different things. So, and there was also, Mike Milken was around, and Drexel Burnham Lambert and the junk bond kings were there, and the LBOs and the hostile raids. And it was hugely exciting in New York at that time. But it's obvious that the whole business is very, it's very plastic. It's very elastic. There's very little that goes on that's legitimate, I would say. In a brokerage firm at that time, and it hasn't really changed all that much. So that then in the 90s, I created the Hollywood Stock Exchange. I invented a virtual currency, and I have a patent on a virtual currency and a virtual trading system. So it got me involved into digital and virtual currencies. And, right up to Bitcoin in 2011, when we started buying it at $1, it's kind of a continuation of my experience on both Wall Street and with the virtual currencies. But throughout the whole time, there's a common theme of underlying laxity in enforcing the rules and regulations for securities industry. And sometimes this comically blows up, like with Enron was an incredible $80 billion evaporation, just built entirely on fraud. WorldCom at that time. Going back earlier, we had the savings and loan crisis back in the 80s. That was a big fraud. There's just dozens and dozens of frauds, and you become something of a connoisseur of financial fraud. Bernie Madoff is one of many, many, many frauds. And they all have a slightly different tinge to them. In the crypto market, as it's called, you see a replay of all these Wall Street scams being replayed in the crypto market. Really, they're not these Ponzi schemes that we see in the crypto market. They're not new. I mean, we've seen them on Wall Street for years and years. And, matter of fact, they're being now perpetrated by Wall Street guys. So Wall Street guys who are doing underhanded things on Wall Street just took all that and applied it to crypto. And they're doing some scams in crypto. And regulators are really weak on Wall Street, and they're really weak in crypto. And so I've always been an observer of this. And certainly in the 80s when I was a stockbroker, I've participated in a lot of different things that were probably not completely above board. And but that's kind of the nature of that industry. It's difficult to be. It's like they would say on Wall Street, if you're not getting sued, you're not trying hard enough. That would be a common mantra you would hear from the management of these brokerage firms. So that's kind of the history of it.
I'll say, in terms of my experience, I wasn't a banker or broker like Max, but I was involved in the foreign exchange market unwittingly. Like I was in the film business, and I started working for Capital Films in London. And what we did is we would sell films. We were a film sales agency. We would sell Hollywood films. So say Disney or Paramount would make a movie. They would retain the U.S. box office income for themselves. They would give it to us to sell to Germany, Japan, Italy. Latin America was often one region. And then we would collect the money, keep 10%, and send the rest back to them. Now, all of our contracts, and we had contracts all over the world, were in US dollar. So these countries would pay us in US dollars. I happened to enter this field at a unique moment in history, which was the late 90s. We had deals with Russia, the Russian ruble collapsed. We had deals with Asia, the Asian financial crisis happened. Italy at that time kept on going through a whole bunch of different governments, and they would devalue their lira over and over. Like every few months, we had an Italian desk to renegotiate those contracts with them. But one thing I observed was, well, to me, it seemed like a very highly volatile situation, the global currency markets. At that time, that was all I knew. But now looking back, I see it was a unique time, a very, very extremely volatile time. One thing that always happened is we were the creditor, they were the debtor, and they always had in an actual business without government getting into the relationship, they always won. So they would, the Italians would call us and say the lira crashed by 30%, or the government devalued it by 30%. The Russians, the ruble collapsed by like 80%. And they would be like, we can't pay you the $100,000, let's say, that we owe you. We could only pay you $20,000. And there was nothing we could do. We would just have to say, okay. So then when the financial crisis happened in 2008, and Ireland or Greece or Cyprus were made to pay out 100%. There was no negotiation with the creditors on that situation. The whole situation was flipped, and you could see what the government had stepped in a fraudulent way. That would never have happened in business. The bondholders would have lost, but they made the bondholders whole. And so I could just, from my own experience, observe at that time, like, wow, like I wish we had this sort of power to get all the money back that we were supposed to be owed, but we had to accept less because of the crisis.
I'm sure someone's asked you guys this before, and maybe I just haven't heard it, but what was like the origin story of how you found Bitcoin? Did you just stumble across the white paper? I mean, obviously you understand this huge issue and as through everything that you just described, and then what led you to finding the solution?
Well, so we were doing Keiser report back in 2011, and Stacy said, hey, I booked a guest on the show, John Matonis from Hushmail, and he's going to talk about Bitcoin, something called Bitcoin. And that was in 2011, and John Matonis came on, and my first question was, okay, what is Bitcoin? And that was how we got introduced to it. I immediately saw it was similar to what I'd been working on with the digital currencies. So I got interested right away, and that's how we got started.
Yeah, it's funny because I was looking through my emails to see when was the first time I ever mentioned in an email Bitcoin. And I found an email from like late 2009. We were living in Paris and making our show in Paris at the time. Late 2009, early 2010. I can't remember when it was, but it was early. And it said to me, hey, there are some of us from Bitcoiners. I forget how they used it, but they said we're Bitcoiners and we're in Paris if you want to join us. I never responded because I didn't know what the heck that was, and I would receive emails all the time anyway from all over the world, and it was just like I would just ignore them because I didn't know who these people were. This was before social media, so this was in like it wasn't like Twitter was well developed or anything at that point. So I never responded to that. And then John Matonis wrote to us, I think it was like December of 2010, to say he was going to be in Paris in a few months or a few weeks, and he wanted to be on the show and talk about Bitcoin. So when I told Max, I said, I have this guest. I said, he has something, it's called Bitcoin. I guess it's like the Hollywood dollar that you had on the Hollywood Stock Exchange, like a virtual currency. And then you could see in that first interview that Bitcoin, I think it was like $1, and then it like shot up because we covered it to like $3, and then it rallied like 200%. But you could see in the interview that Max is like understanding that, wait, this isn't like the Hollywood dollar. And within a month on our show back in 2011, Max was calling it the currency of the resistance.
That's super interesting. I personally never heard that story before. I want to go ahead and tie this into kind of current events. Obviously, right now, the Bitcoin market is seeing 50-60% drawdown, which is nothing but a thing for anyone like you guys who have been in the market for a long time. I will say, it seems like for someone who's been in the market as long as you, this current drawdown must be much easier to stomach than, let's say, the early 90% drawdowns back in like 2013, for example, with like Mt. Gox, collapsing. Walk us through, how do you get through these significant drawdowns? Is it just having, a significant amount of conviction through education about the asset? Obviously in the early days, you must have really gotten your conviction tested when, there's been no historical, quote unquote cycles before. You have the main exchange that exists out there just completely collapsing. I mean, how did you kind of get through those early bear markets? And tying that into current events, how would you compare the current drawdown that we have now to those?
Yeah, well, this is, I think, one of the bigger drawdowns we've had. I think 85% drawdowns. We had from 30 back to $1, 1,200 back to 200, 20,000 down to 3,800, now 70,000 down to 30,000. And at this particular juncture, on this particular one, I don't really think about it at all, which is different than the early ones. So the early ones, because as Stacy points out, the main developing crew, the core developers of Bitcoin themselves were in revolt, and they were talking about hard forking and the big blockers, which wasn't resolved until 2017. But those types of issues were already being discussed, and those would be existential threats to the success of Bitcoin. So the downside was more palpable. The risk reward on Bitcoin right now is one of the most favorable ever. In terms, you don't really have that level of core contention that would be a risk vector. You just don't have it. So at the moment, it's become almost a mature asset class, if you can believe it. But I mean, it's getting closer to being certainly an established asset class, and you have an established group of people owning it. And I would say, this question comes up, and the answer is that if you're buying Bitcoin based on price, then you're not really, you're missing the big picture. So when you buy Bitcoin, it's because you love Bitcoin. I give you like this little scenario. Let's say you go to a flea market and you see a Van Gogh is on sale at the flea market, and it's priced at $5. So, and with certainty that it's a $100 million Van Gogh. So now there's three options here. You can go to the owner of the flea market and complain and say, this is outrageous. That Van Gogh's worth $100 million, you're selling it for $5. And you can complain. Number two, you can be certain it's a Van Gogh, but you don't even want to put up $5 to own it. You're just not even going to risk $5. You're not going to do it. Number three is you're going to buy that Van Gogh for $5, and you'll be very happy you did. So let's play this out. Bitcoin. The first scenario you've got right now, Bitcoin's at 30,000. It's worth, $10, $20 million a coin at some point. So you got a lot of people that would complain about this, like the Christine Lagardes of the world or the Nouriel Rubinis. They go to the regulators or whomever, the press, they say, they complain, like, look, this asset, I'm going to complain about it. It's worth millions, but it's selling for 30,000, and they just complain and they talk about it. Then the second group you have, oh, it's at 30,000, it's worth millions, but they're not going to bother buying it at 30,000. That would be your Peter Schiffs of the world, who I told to buy Bitcoin when it was $1 and $5 and $10 and $50. But even though the case was clear that it's a new asset class and it could be worth millions, he didn't even want to put up $5. So that's the Peter Schiff crowd. Then you have the third group, which is where we were, where it's like, you know what, this is a new asset class. It's going to be worth millions. I'll buy it at $5. I'm happy with that at the risk reward there. And that's still true today. And at 30,000, it's still dirt cheap compared to where it's going. But you still have people who are going to complain about it, like Liz Warren or somebody that, oh my God, I just can't believe that this thing is out there. Or you have people that are just not going to spend the time to understand it. The Peter Schiff still doesn't own it. And then you have the folks that have put in a few hours of work and said, hey, this is worth millions of dollars. I'm going to buy it at 30. I'll buy it at 20. I'll buy it at 60. I'll buy it at 100,000. Doesn't make any difference. I understand the value proposition. I understand how it exists in the ecosystem of the world of fiat money, and I'm going to own it. So those are the three groups, and it's cheap at 30,000. It's cheap at 100,000.
For me, my journey was a little bit different. I think, Bitcoin changes you. You don't change Bitcoin. Bitcoin changes you, and it changed me. And it changed the network, and it changed all the people around me, and it changed itself. Like it's always been itself, but we who were participating in Bitcoin didn't know. So early Bitcoin in 2011, 2012, you still had people like Matti Malmi. You still had people like Gavin Andresen giving away, running faucets, giving away tens of thousands of Bitcoin to people for free. Now, had they known it was a store of value and that it would one day be $60,000, no way on earth would they have done that. Nevertheless, had they not done that, it probably would not have gotten to 60,000 within 10 years. So it's just chicken and egg situation in terms of, or a quantum sort of event, because they had to do that in order to spread Bitcoin around. We had to, have a global television show, evangelizing all the world. And also, like, at that time when we were just like 1,000 people or 2,000 people involved in Bitcoin, it was kind of magic internet money in my mind. Like, it was just like, it was more of a technology. At that time, we were in awe of the core devs, the people who knew how to, code and work on Bitcoin. That was like who understood stuff. And so, when, and also the exchanges were totally, as you mentioned, Mt. Gox blew up, but there were other ones like Bitcoinica, there was Intersango, and they just like blew up or ran away with your money. So we were kind of used to just like, I have like 500 Bitcoin there. Oh, I thought I had an account there. I guess the website's gone. I don't know if I had an account. I don't remember. Like you can't remember what happened to a lot of your Bitcoin because you weren't really tracking it. It wasn't like a store of value. You need to keep this. One day this is going to be worth millions and millions of dollars. Like you just thought, oh, I lost like $600. That sucks. But it was like 600 Bitcoin or something at the time. So it was, and when you had to use that QT wallet and download the whole blockchain onto your laptop, and your laptops blew up and stuff like that. So, it just was kind of still a mystery at that time, even the core devs, even the smartest people in the room. But as more and more people came in, more and more conversation happened, more ideas started to percolate, things got written down, blogs got said, Bitcoin Twitter emerged, and that whole network effect of people, of not just 1,000 people, but 10,000, and then 100,000, and then 1 million looking at it, and then understanding what it was. Max used the masterpiece of Van Gogh. I likened it before to, there was a true story of a Cimabue, which is an early Renaissance masterpiece master artist, and he has like 11 or 12 masterpieces still in existence. Well, this one woman who is like 90 something years old in France owned one of them, and she didn't know. She had it for her whole life. She had it since childhood. Had been in her family, but she hung it over her stove for her entire 90 years. And then once she took it to an auction house or whatever, like as she was aging, getting ready to pass on all her inheritance, they were like, this is a Cimabue, and it was worth $25 million that it sold for. So that was like us with early Bitcoin. We were like, hey, running faucets, giving away tens of thousands, spending it on things like iPhones, like which I did and stuff like that. Like, we wouldn't have done that had we known what it was. But had we known what it was, nobody would have ever parted with all those tens of thousands of Bitcoin. So where would we be? This is like Schrodinger's cat. We'd be dead, or would we be alive? Who knows?
Yeah, that's super fascinating. I never hear about, the early days like that, because I got a market like 2 years ago. So that's fascinating to hear about like the early days. Over the last, like, I would say 4 or 5 months, I will say, like, in the short term, as like a, hardcore Bitcoin kind of evangelist, I have been a bit disappointed. And I'm not saying that this time won't come and that this isn't, the case of what Bitcoin is, but I have been a bit disappointed to see the market not recognize Bitcoin as this geopolitical hedge or inflation hedge as inflation is running rampant, and to see kind of the Bitcoin get basketed in with these broader tech stocks. And I think you'll agree with me that this is kind of a short-term thing. And I also think it's also because the market doesn't fully understand what Bitcoin is yet. What do you guys think about Bitcoin in the basket of just the broader macro environment? Obviously, we've got the Fed, quote unquote, trying to tighten. They're saying, talking very tough. We'll see how long their charade lasts. But I guess, wanted to hear your thoughts and just riff a little bit on macro and Bitcoin's kind of position in the broader market.
Well, the price up towards 70,000, I think, was telegraphing a lot of inflation to come, right? So Bitcoin's markets are discounting mechanisms, and now that inflation manifested and people are talking about it and it's front page news, you buy in the rumor, sell in the news, right? So you have a pullback now that you've got that, and the news happened. It was, leading up to that event that was not yet on people's radar. So now the pullback is back to this level, and it's building a nice base. And before it makes that big assault to another price range, I think this price range and this era in Bitcoin, I call the Michael Saylor era. So Michael Saylor came in roughly 2 years ago. He started buying it at 10,000. I think MicroStrategy started buying it at 20,000. They've got a cost basis of 30,700, and which is roughly this range, this price range, the Michael Saylor era, MicroStrategy era. And but I think we're coming to the end of that era, and we're going to enter a new era. You're going to have the CBDCs come along from the central banks. That'll be paired with maybe a sovereign wealth fund, $1 trillion sovereign wealth fund putting $100 billion into Bitcoin, right? So that'll be a new era. And when that takes shape, the Bitcoin price can jump very quickly, very fast into the six-figure range. I think back to my Wall Street days, and Peter Lynch wrote some great books on stock markets. He wrote one called One Up on Wall Street. It's a classic. He talks about how the year's gain in a winter in a stock market typically happens over a 5 to 6 day period, a very compressed period of time. When you look back over the year and you said, oh, I own this stock, I made 20%. Well, it generally happened, that move happened over 1 week, maybe an earnings surprise or something like that. So, you never know exactly when that week is going to come, but if you're not in the market during that week, you will have missed that move. So Bitcoin from 30,000 to 300,000 can happen pretty quickly. I think right now also another wave that we're seeing is the collapse of the third wave of major frauds in crypto with the VC money, the VC coins, the Web3 coins. This is the third major wave of fraud. It seems to be breaking up at this time with the Luna scam and the Solana scam, and all these. Ethereum is basically a scam. So all these scams are now kind of falling apart. This is the third wave that since the beginning of Bitcoin, and that'll bring in now a new wave. And I think that new wave, Stacy talks about really the CBDCs as being the fourth major wave of central bank crypto fraud, right? It's no longer going to be Andreessen Horowitz doing crypto fraud. It'll be European Central Bank doing crypto fraud. Christine Lagarde will be doing crypto fraud, and that'll be the fourth wave. And concurrent with that would be a Bitcoin price in the six figures. So these, they kind of go together. I don't think you can, there's no correlation. Bitcoin is not really correlated with anything. It temporarily might correlate with NASDAQ. It temporarily might correlate with commodities, but ultimately it doesn't correlate with anything. It's on its own vector, and it's just heading to a much higher place. And any correlation in any short period of time is more coincidental than it is fact-based or fundamental based. So I think that's where we're at.
But I think in a way, a lot of that sort of analysis is still fiat based. I think what we're heading towards is hyper Bitcoinization. So as we get there, I think, just like I said, the network of participants in Bitcoin alter what it reveals itself to be. In the early days, it was the hackers and the coders and the degenerates, people buying online drugs or porn or gambling, things like that were illegal. You couldn't get a credit card to do it. WikiLeaks was an early, 2010, I believe it was. Satoshi warned against letting them or wanting them. You can't obviously stop them, but stop encouraging him to adopt Bitcoin. And then, then the high frequency traders and the hedge funds came in because there was massive arbitrage opportunities. They just saw that sitting there between these huge exchanges, and you had to play that, right? And then they saw, all the high frequency traders saw BitMEX, and they saw that they could scalp all these noobs sitting there, like these small potato guys, playing with setting their limit orders and stuff, and they just took all of those. And then we have, when we get to hyper Bitcoinization, the moment is now, right? We're at the nation state level. We have El Salvador. We have President Bukele has adopted legal tender. Bitcoin is legal tender in El Salvador. But what came first? Did that move cause the U.S. to freeze reserves on February 26, 2022? Everything has changed from that moment. Just because people don't recognize it, it doesn't mean it didn't happen. What happened on February 26, 2022 is the U.S. seized reserves. The first time that has happened of a foreign nation. So the dollars, they blew up the dollar. They decided to wipe it out as layer one money. It's no longer fungible. It is you need that to be money. And now it's not. They froze reserves, it's over. So just because people haven't recognized that and they're still in a fiat mentality of number go up, which one am I need to flip around with Hex or Solana or AVAX or any of these other shitcoins in order to buy more Bitcoin and whatever. That's just a mentality that is fiat. What price is there to what unconfiscatable permissionless wealth? Just like we were talking about masterpiece art. There's no price literally on the Mona Lisa, because how do you even price it? That's the same thing. Where we're going with hyper Bitcoinization, there's no price on that. How do you, in a world of a disintegrating fiat, in a world of a collapsing empire, and it's not, saying anything unique to America, because all empires have done this before them. They all take everything down with them. And if their dollar, if they can't sustain the exorbitant privilege and the Cantillionaire effect for their own elite, then they're going to take the whole thing down, clearly, because that's what they've just done. So, this is a new era, and I think it's hyper Bitcoinization is here, and there's no sort of way to value your life, your sovereignty, and unconfiscatable wealth.
Yeah, I like that perspective a lot. One thing you touched on was El Salvador, and you guys have been very active there and kind of have, had your boots on the ground there. So I would love to just dive into, moving on from any price related things, talking about what's going on there. What have been some of the firsthand things that you've noticed and positive impacts of Bitcoin on the community there that you've seen?
Well, you don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you. And the whole country is being transformed by Bitcoin and the ethos of Bitcoin and the aesthetic beauty of Bitcoin, the practicality of Bitcoin. The people on the ground are happy with this. They like the idea of having unconfiscatable wealth. And people will come up to me all the time and say, Max, I have $50 in Bitcoin. And it's the first time in their lives they've had unconfiscatable savings, unconfiscatable wealth, and they're building on it. They're adding to it. And they're happy about it, and it gives you a sense of agency, a sense of pride. They know that their president has been instrumental in part of this whole revolution. And on the sovereign level, of course, the country is squaring off against the IMF and other world organizations, which is, I think, being applauded by everybody who sees the threat of these supranational world organizations being overreaching. And that's becoming a greater problem on a daily basis. And they see what El Salvador is doing, and they applaud it. And now that is spreading into the region and around the world. And also, it's amazing that, adjusted for the tourism dollar and the foreign direct investment money that's coming into El Salvador, the current Bitcoin position of the country, which is is under what they paid for it. It's still, if you adjust for the tourism and everything else, it's still a huge winner for them. Even though they're on paper, they don't have any paper gains at the moment. It's still a huge winner economically speaking. The GDP is over 10% for the year. It looks like it's going to bust 15-20% next year, and that's pretty much due to Bitcoin.
Right. And look at the story of El Salvador. The story for hundreds of years is of occupation, imperialism, slaughter of the indigenous people, neoliberalism, economic hitmen, mass homicides, the gang wars, civil war, all of that stuff. The story has changed overnight like that. And when you go there and you talk to the people who are born and raised and their families have lived there for generations, they're like shell shocked. They're looking around like, who are all you people coming here? I can't believe this is, people are coming here. We have fled. We have left for my parents, my grandparents, my uncles, my aunts, my cousins. Everybody seeks to flee to America, to somewhere else, because that is the only opportunity. And now that is changing. And I believe that's similar to what happened to Florence in the Renaissance, the first Renaissance. I believe you'll see a Renaissance 2.0 in El Salvador. Who knows what form that will take, because at that, back in the Renaissance, you're coming out of a dark ages, and I think we're coming out of a dark ages now, a dark ages of fiat. And back then, the hard money that was the florin, the most perfect of the gold standards at that time, that drew in more trade. More trade brought in more, wealth to Florence, which brought in people who wanted more freedom. So they were the freest people of all of the city-states in what is now modern day Italy, which drew in the artists, which drew in the cycle was just kept on feeding on itself until this greatness that we still talk about today. And I think you'll have the same thing with El Salvador. One of the things that I've been doing there for the last few months is trying to do what I can to make sure that, until this is like totally embedded and Bitcoin is embedded, and the president himself is definitely like complete Bitcoin maximalist, totally orange pilled. But as you know, all the shitcoiners have billions of dollars that they can print, and they go there and they try to find an avenue to corrupt. Now, there's a lot of Latin Americans. There are many Latin Americans there who are drawn there. Many Venezuelans. We were talking to a Venezuelan friend there who said, like, when hyperinflation first hit under Maduro, what they saw in Venezuela was the arrival of every shitcoin. So there was no just like, it was Bitcoin and all the shit coins, and every person was met with this avalanche of shit because the shit was free. Bitcoin you have to work for. It's harder to get. So all these people were given free shit but the shit all collapsed since then. So they're all like, they connect that to Bitcoin. So trying to avoid that sort of situation where people get conned or confused by the shitcoins that are always, they always present themselves as a new Bitcoin, or that, that's a classic con, right? You go for the best. You pretend you're gold, when you had fool's gold. And the same thing with these shitcoins. So that's what I've been doing there. And I think it's worked quite well. And, that's why we're ready after what, 7-8 months of just living there most of the time. Right now we're in North Carolina, but most of the time we spend down there. And that's why we've started investing with Zante Capital. I think it's ready. There's a lot of good stuff about to happen with the new laws that the president is introducing, and the volcano bond, which will be coming forward soon. So I think, you're going to see the next boom up there very soon.
I really like that framework about the Bitcoin Renaissance. I think it's super interesting, and I think people overlook the cultural impact of what can happen when you have a bedrock foundation of sound money. And I also like the way you kind of talked about. I think the one of the most beautiful things about Bitcoin is the game theory of adoption is such that the countries that need it first adopt it first. And I think that's kind of what we're starting to see pan out. And on a similar note, can you guys explain for us, what was this recent, it seemed like there was a meeting of other South and Central American central bankers. Maybe I'm wrong about who exactly it was, but it was a group of central bankers in El Salvador. What was going on there, and what was kind of the meat and potatoes of that meeting?
So those were 32 central bankers and 12 financial authorities from developing nations around the world. They meet often, throughout the years, and these 44 nations, and they chose to meet in El Salvador because financial inclusion is something that is important to them. That's one thing that most of us Bitcoin podcasters and stuff, we have the luxury. It's easy for us to get bank accounts. It's easy for us to sign up for Cash App or Venmo or all these credit cards and stuff like that. But these countries don't have that. They don't have access to banking services. A lot to do with the US, like the situation in El Salvador, why so many people are unbanked is not only do they have not much money, but they don't want to, the banks there don't want to get cut off from SWIFT. So you have one bad person there who has $200 in their bank account. Is it worth it to get cut off from SWIFT? No. It's the same thing across Africa and a lot of Latin America. It's just the risk reward for them to be cut off from the global financial system is just too high. So when they heard about El Salvador and the experience of them, not only, they had 70% of the population was unbanked, and now they're all banked, right? Because they could download the Chivo wallet or any other Bitcoin wallet and spend it at many government services and things like that. We've been in Bitcoin, as you mentioned, since 2011, $1. We've been to every conference around the world, participated in Bitcoin for years, until I went to El Zante, which is a little village. Maybe there's 1,000 people that live there. And it's hyper Bitcoinized. It's the only place I've ever been that's totally hyper Bitcoinized. And on Lightning, that's thanks to Nicholas Berti, I think, is the one that actually, built on Lightning. He spent 3 years there with a vision that Lightning could be the one that hyper Bitcoinizes a population, and it worked. And you see it if you go there. Until you experience it, it's hard to explain that there's no friction at all. And that's pretty amazing. So, I think that's where hopefully that model, as El Zante draws in so many tourists, and it's always in the press, and it's in the global media, and it's covered, that just that positive model of inspiration convinces other municipalities and villages and towns across El Salvador to do this for themselves, because who doesn't want the tourist, Bitcoin, or the visitors, and who doesn't want happy, positive people all around them?
Yeah, that's incredible, and I'd love to make the trip down there at some point to experience that. I think the last topic that we could talk about is El Zante Capital, and maybe you guys could walk us through, when did you launch this? What's kind of the goal of El Zante?
Well, we launched it formally just a few weeks ago, really. And it's something that we came up with when we were in El Salvador. And we've had experience in the VC business now going back. We made our first Bitcoin venture capital investment back in 2013. And we have several funds, Bitcoin Capital 1, 2, and 3, Heisenberg Capital. So these have made 15, 16 investments in Bitcoin companies over the years. We have 6 or 7 unicorns that have come out of that. Like Kraken, for example, we got in at a $5 million valuation. I think they're going to look and do 10 billion or so now. So we have a pretty good track record in this space and picking winners, I guess you could say. So it seemed like this was a great place to set up a new fund. So El Zante, of course, is the surf town where Bitcoin Beach and hyper-Bitcoinization is taking place. And we've already made a couple of investments, and we're looking to do, I think, cap out at 10 million on this round, on this fund. And the theme is hyper-Bitcoinization.
Yeah, and because we're early investors in the space, and Max puts it well. He always says, like, we bet on the jockey, not the horse. So that's what we've always done with our investments. And like, say, Kraken, it was we bet on Jesse Powell, right? So that was back in 2013. So that's who we bet on. The same thing here is, I think, we do have the connections to have some good investment opportunities, like to participate in the Galloway round that is just closing. So okay, that's one thing. But we're also interested in, VC investing is risky, right? It's not like it. They make it seem like everybody's a billionaire and it's just like a sure bet, right? But it's risky, and where we want to take that risk on Salvadorans, like we want to invest in Salvadoran companies and encourage Salvadoran people to participate in this Bitcoin economy and hyper-Bitcoinization. They're the first nation to hyper-Bitcoinize, so they should enjoy that. They should be there for the ride. It shouldn't, it will be what it will be, but they should try to get on board. And we're hopefully going to be there to cultivate this, because I think El Salvador could be the center, like Florence, of the new financial world, like this, with their new securities laws coming, and they're going to be the center of all of this financial world built upon Bitcoin. So, like, not only are we investing in startups and entrepreneurs there, but we're bringing in, like, a lot of our time is spent convincing people like Jimmy Song to come there and educate Salvadoran coders to be able to code and program Bitcoin and build on Bitcoin, so that the population itself is invested in this future that they're building, right? That their country is building, that they're the pioneers. So let's get it on, right? This is what we're 100% totally in on El Salvador and on President Bukele.
That's incredible, and I'm really looking forward to seeing updates of what comes out of the project. So, congrats on the launch over the last few weeks. Before we wrap up, is there any, I guess, final words or any words of wisdom that you want to leave the listeners with?
Prepare for good times. Sometimes it's difficult for people to believe in good times, right? And get ready. This is the time of individual sovereignty. We've had thousands of years without individual sovereignty. It was like back to the Stone Ages, like when there were no governments, and the only thing controlling you was like the woolly mammoth, and you had to make sure to run faster than that thing. But now it's like individual sovereignty, total freedom. In El Salvador, President Bukele calls it a model of economic liberty. And the founding fathers of America did warn, like, it's like a republic if you can keep it. So, this is a mindset. You have to be prepared for freedom. You have to be prepared for liberty. A lot of people are afraid of it, but good times are coming, right? Renaissance 2.0 is here. And as I said, I believe we're exiting a fiat dark ages. And you could see that with all the opioid overdoses, the increase in mortality, and especially with young people, that's a sign of bad times, right? That's not a healthy, vibrant, booming economy. That's not a good situation. I think we're exiting that and we're heading to good times. So I think get ready.
Yep. The only thing you have control over is yourself. Everything else is completely out of your control, including Bitcoin. And mastering yourself is a full-time job. And things could change very quickly. The clouds disappear and it's sunny, and those are people who are prepared for it are going to jump in and take advantage. And those who are mired in self-doubt are going to be hesitant, and they're going to miss it. Now, in the case of El Salvador, the clouds have already disappeared. They're already on the one, so to speak. they're already moving in this incredibly interesting and fascinating and productive direction. And so that's why we're really going there. That's why we're there, is because we've always been kind of on the cutting edge of this industry. And so that's where it is right now. The bleeding edge of Bitcoin is in El Salvador at the moment. So that's where we have to be. Max and Stacy have to always be at the very, very, very forefront of everything. So that's what we're doing.
We were even the first Bitcoin couple. Now there's like 100 of them.
Yeah, you guys are the OGs. There's now that couple I like. They do like the little video skits. I met them in Miami. So, I think that's a great place to end it. Thank you guys so much for your time, and maybe we'll get you on in a couple quarters or so to update us on everything that you're up to. So, take care.
Thank you.